Coming to you live from the Beltline in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm your host, Kelly Bastian, and if you think you're a normal person, welcome to the Normal Person Podcast.
Some people act like normal's a four-letter word, but most of us want to be normal. To sit and talk for a bit about it, whatever it is. Are you okay today to press play? Is there any other way to be normal?
On this week's episode, we're getting nostalgic and inviting passing strangers to sit down with us and tell us one thing that no longer exists, but they wish it still did.
It technically does exist, but it's not in wide use. Personal home landlines.
Okay. Interesting.
Should still exist, and I miss that.
My answer would be Blockbuster. If you're, and you're a millennial in your late 20s, 30s, that was a staple for most people.
Yeah.
Or Hollywood Video, not as good.
So I would say iPods. I know Apple discontinued them, but bringing back the iPod would be pretty nice.
As a great poet slash songwriter slash philosopher once said, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And even though Adam Duritz is always technically right, I think we should all ask the same question when something we cherish suddenly no longer exists. Are we better or worse off without it? As always, before we jump into our first guest of today's episode, I want to encourage anyone listening to relax, take a deep breath, and reflect on something you think should still exist but no longer does. When and why did you experience this thing? How did it make you feel? And most importantly, how do you feel now that it's no longer around? To kick off today's episode with a bang buster of an answer, I'd like you to meet Lauren, a nonprofit director by day and a bartender by night, whose answer to today's question will probably resonate with most people over the age of 25. Well, how do you feel about jumping right into the question? I know that we kind of crossed paths while I was setting up and you said you're going to think about it, so I know you've been thinking about it.
I've been thinking.
And so I want to give you as much time as you need. You ready for this?
I'm ready to dive in.
So today we're asking people on the Beltline, what's one thing that no longer exists that you wish still existed?
So that's a very good question. A lot ran through my mind.
Yeah.
I would say, after I thought long and hard on the walk to and from this Beltline, my answer would be Blockbuster.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying I expected that, but I was hoping someone would say it.
So I don't know what the age demographic is for most of the people that come on here, but for me, that was the time.
Six-year-olds mainly.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm right there.
Yeah.
No, I would say a lot of these answers that populated in my mind were just very nostalgic to my childhood. Yeah. So it was just everything that I could think of growing up. And I had some other various answers that maybe just weren't as good. But Blockbuster for me, I mean, if you're, and you're a millennial in your late 20s, 30s, that was a staple for most people.
Yeah.
Or Hollywood Video, not as good.
Not as good, but they always had an attached game store. You know what I'm talking about? Blockbuster never, you could rent games at Blockbuster, but you couldn't. Maybe you could purchase them. I don't know. I was a kid.
So with Blockbuster, when they were trying to, save their chain, they did end up putting the video games in store that you could play.
But it was
kind of
towards the
late.
end. Yeah. One question I have to follow up is what do you remember about Blockbuster? What makes it special?
So a lot of things. One thing I do remember is you had to have backup options to your backup options to your backup options.
Yeah.
Because whenever there was a new, release out, the one wall was just covered in the same movie.
Yeah.
And if you were, 5 minutes too late, every one of those was taken. So then you had to go to your, the second most popular movie that just came out, and then...
Or Hollywood Video, if you were really desperate. If you were really desperate.
Very desperate, yeah. And then if, all your backup options were gone, you just perused the aisles until you found some very random movie that you're like, well, I'm settling.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with this right now.
And your mom, and I'm assuming you were a child when this happened. In my experience, my mom would literally set a timer. I don't know how she did this, actually. She probably just made this up, but she'd be like, 10 minutes, we're out. Of course, she never made this rule when we went to Kohl's or JCPenney to go shop for whatever.
For her, right? Yeah.
But that was always a stressful dilemma to me, as I've always felt like there was a countdown timer in my head. Yeah, and it's if I don't find this movie, what am I going to do for the next 5 days?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Could you explain to someone listening, the stress of video rentals and, the 5-day policy and what happens if you didn't return it?
So you definitely get a fee, but also depends on how old you are. If it's VHS times, you got to rewind, be kind, rewind.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I'm aging myself a little bit right here.
Wow.
You did have to rewind them, and every once in a while, if the clerk or the person behind the counter, the kid at high school working there, didn't check them and rewind it, you'd pop in the movie, and it'd be either the ending of this movie or in the middle, and you're like, well, this sucks. Now I know what happens.
Yeah. Do you feel like the world would be better off today if this still existed?
I think Blockbuster is a connector of people.
Wow.
I think Blockbuster is a bridge builder of community.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Okay. Can you explain a little bit? How so?
You can meet anyone. Say there's a couple different neighborhoods. Maybe you're meeting somebody that you wouldn't have met normally. Everyone in today's age finds people, online, which is not bad. But this forces people to get out of their homes, talk, or maybe your hands brush reaching for the same movie. Ooh.
Wow.
Fun fact, my first date was at Blockbuster.
Wow.
Quotes.
You went to Blockbuster to rent a movie, and then you're like, all right, see you later.
It was a secret date. So
Okay.
I told my mom I really needed to go to Blockbuster to rent a movie. He told his dad he had to go to Blockbuster to rent a movie.
Interesting.
We stood in the same aisle, standing
Wow.
near each other. We didn't talk, but we knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were this is a date.
Wow. But you couldn't say anything.
We couldn't say anything
Yeah,
because our parents were there, and they
Yeah.
couldn't know that we almost parent trapped them into being there.
Wow. That's crazy. But streaming, do you think it's made the world better for consumption? Worse? What are your thoughts on streaming?
That's a tough question. I would say there's a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
Again, I would say that's a connector of people. You could meet people anywhere in the world and they could have watched the same show just in another language.
Right.
And then there's, the downfall where it's you get somebody that maybe falls into a little bit of a lull and their outlet is just to binge days on end of whatever streaming service. And it can be a little detrimental.
Which they could have technically done that by going to Blockbuster.
Yeah, but then the late fees and you have to get back out of your house to drop it off.
We really don't want people to unalive themselves over media, right?
No.
It's
No.
And if you need to binge something, do it. Don't let Blockbuster hold you up. And so maybe in some ways it's good. Being one of the first guests that we sat down with during today's episode, I really hung on to our new friend Lauren's description of Blockbuster as a connector of people. It wasn't just about physically walking through those fluorescent lit blue and yellow aisles. It was about the shared experiences and connections it fostered to so many different types of people. Speaking of different people, I noticed a very clear theme emerging from our many different conversations. When reflecting on things that no longer exist, we tend to ignore the technological advancements that led to their disappearance and focus on the bygone eras that connected us to other people. And that being said, our next guest, James, brings a unique perspective to this issue, especially considering he spends most of his day operating an ethically focused small business community called Local Connective. Without spoiling too much, let's just say Steve Jobs himself would be very proud to hear what James is about to say. What's one thing that doesn't exist anymore that you wish still existed?
It's the doesn't exist anymore part that kind of throws me, because I had a good one.
Okay, why's that?
Because what doesn't exist anymore that I would want that would be relevant in today's world?
I mean, listen, we can get into semantics for sure, but I was going to say, you can literally be like, it may technically exist, but it doesn't exist to me.
So I would say iPods.
Dude.
Yes.
Yeah, let's hear it. I'm going to shut up because I have a lot to say.
So I know Apple discontinued them for their various reasons, whatnot.
Yeah.
But bringing back the iPod would be nice. One, because for the most part, it was just music.
Yeah.
Right?
And some really bad games.
Yes.
Yeah.
But just focusing on just the music part, right? Because I'm thinking if I'm at work or if I'm working and whatnot, and I have my phone and I'm listening to Spotify or whatever, the opportunities for distraction are a lot higher having my phone listening to music versus just having the iPod.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
So I'm not saying I'd use my iPod everywhere, but it's nice to have the choice. I'm a choice guy.
Yeah.
Right? Let me figure out what I want to do and if I want to use it or not. And so if I had the iPod, that would probably be cool to bring back just for the selection of music and things.
What do you think it was about that separation of music and its own device that really resonated with you?
So one, I think it's like just the time of when it was popular, like early 2000s or so.
Yeah.
And I remember going in like middle school and everything and people having it. Let me think, maybe that was the beginning of the demise of the social structure that we have now based off of the 2000s, because
you said you're 26?
Yes.
Okay. So you were born in 99?
98.
Okay, 98. So you kind of witnessed the transition into the digital age, because
Yes.
we took a lot of baby steps to get to where we are today.
Yes.
but
And
now-
anti-socialism.
Yeah, but like since 2010, our media consumption and habits have not really changed.
Right.
Right? It's like we're basically doing the same thing we did 15 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember like going into middle school and like people just listen to their music, not really. That was kind of the beginning of the not talking and just being by yourself, loner type of
On
vibe.
the bus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was like, all right, that's cool. But that's where I was saying, like, I think that's the beginning of like the individualization, more of it. Because if I'm listening to music and I'm connecting with other people digitally and things like that, why would I necessarily need to connect with you,
Right.
in that environment?
Right. Yeah, there almost was this like era. We're not that far apart in age, right? Like you were like a freshman when I was a senior. So it's like we're
Yeah.
basically the same generation.
Yep.
I remember in elementary school and middle school that people would have physical collections of CDs that they would bring on with a CD player.
Oh, absolutely.
And they would kind of be in their own world, but it wasn't like what it is like with a smartphone, because there's only so much you can do to entertain yourself when you're
Right.
only listening to music. So a lot of the times what would happen in these environments is like, hey man, do you have this CD? Or do you have that CD or
That's
this?
exactly.
And people start swapping CDs, start talking about music,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Still had that ability to like consume and listen, but you were still interacting socially.
Yeah.
To
Because you had to.
exactly.
Literally, yeah. Remember one time my parents got me a CD player, but I only had Kids Bop.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
That's very revealing
But,
on the childhood.
If this says anything about me, I was able to manipulate and trade things out, and I turned a Kids Bop 8 CD into Green Day's American Idiot.
Okay.
I was able to switch around.
Flip it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of hustled a little bit, and
Entrepreneurialism. I see it.
Thanks, man.
All right.
And when I got my first iPod, that was kind of another element of it. I had the Nano,
Yeah.
and basically, like, you could only have like 80 songs. And it was the same situation I was describing in the CDs, where it was like you ran out of songs, and people would literally be like, you want to switch iPods for this bus ride?
Right.
And it's
listen to
like,
other music.
yeah, and it's like there was no fear. Like, I wouldn't switch like an iPhone with someone, right?
No,
because
no.
yeah, they'll steal it.
My
but
text messages.
But like an iPod, I'm like, sure, let's swap and
Yeah.
whatever. So one final follow-up to this. Do you think the world would be better off today if music was separated from everything else? Like if we still had MP3 players, essentially?
I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because the issues that we face in the world today, I think, are larger than music. Music is an influence of culture, of course, but it can also be a removal of culture. And so the MP3 or your phone or whatever, that's just a mechanism to consume, not what you're consuming, if that makes sense.
Right.
So that's why I would say no. However, if we did change music, I think that would help alleviate a lot of the world's, you got the Black Eyed Peas, Where's the Love? Can't go
Yeah.
wrong with that song.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we need a little bit more love in the world. We need a little bit more community.
I actually love that song.
Yeah.
Were you a big fan of that song?
I was, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the first song I have on Spotify.
It's the first
Yeah.
song I had. I'm pretty sure, one, it was Irreplaceable by Beyonce.
Okay.
That was the first song I ever purchased on iTunes. And then it was What Is the Love?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, not to go off rails, but it's crazy how that song was written, during George Bush's time?
Yeah.
And how much the words and messaging and everything still resonates and relates to what we're going through now. So, yeah, we need more love in the world.
I agree. And more iPods.
Truthfully, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what has caused this modern feeling of lack of connection with others that James so eloquently described in this conversation. Could it be the lack of physical connection spaces like Blockbuster, a change in the capabilities of our handheld tech like the iPhone revolution? Or, as our next two guests are about to explain in their answer, could this lack of connection also be caused by the shift in the way we communicate?
First of all, let's get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah.
What's y'all's names? We'll start there.
I'm Tori.
I'm
Tori?
Grace.
Grace. Tori and Grace, what brings you to the Beltline today?
Yeah, so we were gonna get our nails done today after church, and then they were booked everywhere we went. They were like, no, get out of here.
So we turned to the outdoors because
Wow.
in this post-hurricane weather, you got to be outside.
Which, shout out to anyone that's been affected by the hurricane.
Honestly.
It's been terrible. But, okay, so y'all couldn't find a nail appointment. Went to the Beltline. I feel like I've kind of gotten to know you a little bit on and off camera, and I want to give you all as much time since there's two of you to answer today's question. So how do you feel about just like jumping right into it?
I'm down.
You're ready.
Okay. So tell me about one thing that no longer exists, but you wish it still did.
Okay. It technically does exist, but like it's not in wide use. I think a landline,
Oh,
like personal home landlines,
okay. Interesting.
should still exist, and I miss that.
Okay, well, I've got a few follow-ups, but
Yeah.
it sounds like there's some resentment there because the word "should" is very powerful.
Yes.
Why do you think they should exist?
I don't like being readily available to everyone all the time.
That's fair.
I think that people should. I think a lot of modern technology is all about like the most immediate convenience, mostly for the purposes of like capitalism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's good for people. Sometimes my boss like texts me all the time about work stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not at work.
Right.
Like, I shouldn't have to respond to this.
You're like, call me on my landline.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, would you rather have a reality? Because, I have a very similar belief to you. I don't
Yeah.
like being always available. When I complain about it to people that grew up, they're like, oh, would you rather come home to 18 messages on your voicemail and have to listen through all of that and have to respond because there was like a social
Yeah.
etiquette where it's like you do respond to voicemails, Now if I get a voicemail, I'm like, what's that? I don't even care anymore.
Yeah, I think I probably would prefer that because it's kind of like, when you were like little and you were like so excited to get like a letter in the mail
Yeah.
when you're like at summer camp.
Yeah.
Like, I think that getting like all of your voicemails all at once is kind of like, it would be like opening up a cool little box.
Yeah.
And like maybe some of them are like, hey, we want to talk about your car insurance. You know what I
and
mean?
you just skip it.
But some of
Yeah.
them might be like your grandma and she's like, hey, honey, how are you doing? You know?
Yeah.
And then it's like cute and fun.
Oh, I never
Yeah.
thought about that.
I will say, I don't know if I would like all the voicemails, like 18 to have to respond to, but I think it would be better for my mental health.
Yeah.
Because then it's contained within that context.
Yeah.
Right.
You deal with it all at once. You've scheduled in like an hour or whatever to go through it all.
Yeah.
It's just a part of your routine.
Right.
Yeah.
In a more beneficial way, I think.
No, I agree. Well, I've got some more follow-ups, but let me ask you
Yeah.
what your response is.
I wish Vine still existed.
We called it. I was like,
Oh,
how long until someone says
100%.
Vine?
I'm very passionate about this.
Okay.
I think the world would be a better place
Really?
if Vine was our short form content social media instead of TikTok.
Yes, so I agree. And I really need to be careful in how I phrase this because I advertise the podcast on TikTok and they're going to blacklist
we
me.
were saying
Before the podcast, I was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to get canceled or I'm going to get you all like off of TikTok or something.
Nah, I mean, TikTok doesn't control our destiny. Apple Podcast does.
Okay,
So-
great.
So Vine, what's the nostalgia element for you? What draws you into it? You said specifically it would be better than TikTok. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. I will say, I don't know if Vine existed today, if they would have been a part of the whole algorithm of social engineering and capitalizing on social media like is common today. Maybe if it did exist today, it would be like that. I don't know. I think the meme-like humor of Vine is a little lost today and maybe isn't as mainstream
And
on
it's an art.
TikTok.
It's truly an art form.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the humor was better. Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
But again, I was born in 95, so you're talking to a full-on millennial right now. Like,
also don't think it was as addictive as current social media.
so when did you use Vine? Like, what were when did it stop?
I guess 2014? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that was when it was most popular.
And you feel like it was less addictive or intentionally exploitative of our
Yes.
attention spans.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me ask some questions for both of y'all. And,
Uh-huh.
and anyone can chime in. But, like, if this were to still exist today, do you think the world would be a better place? I mean, there's obviously some subtext in your answer that kind of pointed
Right.
to that. But I kind of want to hear the specific reason. Like, in 2024, if landlines and Vine were still around, why would we be better off?
I think for me, definitely like kind of being able to slow down and be more present in the moment without the like constant notifications of your cell phone, whether that's like text messages or phone calls or whatever,
Right.
would be better than like what we have now. Like if we had landlines, that would be a better thing. Like personal experience as a barista, a lot of the times I'll be like trying to take someone's order and they're on the phone, like on their AirPods. And it's like, I feel like especially amongst younger generations, everyone is always complaining about like not being able to like really connect with people
Yeah.
in real life. But it's like if you're constantly tied to your phone, you can't make those connections with
Yeah.
people in real life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know it's such a now it's like part of the human condition to like when you're in any scenario where you don't have conversation or entertainment and you're just trying to kill time, it's like, let me pull my phone out.
Right.
But I always do think about the before times. I had a Game Boy when I was a kid, which is the equivalent of like an iPad. And I think you're right. It's like people just had to like,
Talk to people.
yeah, it's crazy.
Right.
Well, what about you, Vine? I mean, TikTok is dominating the game right now, right? But let's just say Vine and all its fidelity was preserved, right?
Right.
6 seconds. They never made the jump to 12. You remember when
Yeah,
they did that?
yeah.
We're still in 6-second Vine era, and it still exists. It's independent. Do you think the world would be better?
Yes, I do. In my mind, when I was a high school, middle school student using Vine, it was more about entertainment and just funny, like meme videos,
Yeah.
right? Now, when I'm on social media today, it's not only entertainment, it's also like politics, education, people giving financial advice, all these random things. And I don't think my brain can really handle all of that at once.
Yeah.
I think, I really wish I could have a little more context around the important content that I consume, like the news and politics. And I wish that I just had a social media that was just fun and games. And in my
Yeah.
mind, that's fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like,
Yeah.
like you said, long form for important things or things that need context. But you feel like TikTok has kind of basically taken the way the algorithm functions to keep us glued in and applied that across the board. Basically, like all media, all information gets treated as entertainment, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just don't think our brains are wired to handle that.
Yeah.
Like,
Or to understand like what's serious and what's not.
exactly.
So far in today's episode, we've heard a lot of amazing answers to today's question. But most of the people we've talked to have grown up in a younger, more tech-savvy generation. What about someone who remembers life before the internet, or even before Blockbuster? Our next and final guest of the day is a lifelong wildlife photographer and first-generation immigrant who brings his own unique and deeply empathetic perspective to today's question.
Roy.
Well, Roy, thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem.
Tell me what you're doing on the Beltline today. I know we've kind of talked off camera, but I kind of want to hear what brought you out here.
Well, probably about maybe twice a month we'll come out here on the weekend and walk with my wife and just enjoy the diverse people and the different shops and activities that are going on out here.
Yeah. Are y'all from Atlanta?
No, we're out of Miami.
Okay.
We moved up here for work, business, opened up a shop.
Nice.
And she went to school, finished her nursing, and she works at Northside
Okay.
Hospital.
Cool. You said opened up a shop. You own a business?
Yeah, until COVID happened.
Okay. Yep.
I did photography with wildlife, wildlife animals.
That's
birds,
amazing.
Yeah. Tropical birds and owls. I did that for 15 years.
Oh my gosh. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever talked to a photographer before. What kind of got you into that, especially in the wildlife? That's like such a niche, right?
Yes. I was raised in the Caribbean for most of my young childhood life. So most of the kids were out there playing football and kickball or something, and I was out in the forest.
Okay.
Catching
And-
things, getting bitten, getting stung,
Yeah, and I was about to say in the Caribbean, how, just for our American audiences that are listening, although, hey, shout out, we do have some people in Canada that are listening now, and maybe possibly the Caribbean. But I was going to say, like, how different is the wildlife there?
Compared to Miami, nothing dangerous or deadly.
Okay. So it's not like Central America where it's...
No. But very unique and rare. And there's animals there that are found nowhere else but in those types of islands. Certain types of protected species of iguana, they're there. Different types of beautiful tropical birds. You know, you'll find them throughout those islands and not in the States or Latin America, which are an endangered species that's also protected.
Yeah. The other follow-up before we get into the real question today is, like, shooting animals, how is that different from shooting humans and vice versa?
Wow, it's so much more fun.
Okay.
It's more rewarding. It's more fun. There's no arguing. There's no fighting. There's no... When you're shooting animals, you're just shooting because of the color, you know, the beauty of the animal. And you see the happiness on my customer's face when they're actually being able to hold a $6,000 bird where they wouldn't be able to anywhere else. And the biggest smile that they have, it's more rewarding for me.
Yeah.
It really is. And when you have the animal that's working for you on point, no problem. They know what they're doing. They're ready for it. This is what they do. No problems at all.
Wow.
You know?
Wow. It sounds like just a lot of amazing experiences
absolutely
came out of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely it is. Yes.
Well, I feel like, you know, obviously we've talked off camera. I used to try to hide that from the audience, but I've got to know you a little bit off camera, and you came back after coming up. You were one of the first people to talk to us today, and you've been thinking about this question a lot.
Yes.
So I don't want to take too much time out of your day.
That's fine.
But I wanted to just jump into the question, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine there.
What's one thing that no longer exists that you wish still existed?
Well, being that I'm a father of 2 girls, the first thing that just comes to mind is activities in the school that kids used to do.
Like what?
Home ec, having a guidance counselor to help guide you where you might want to go in life.
Right.
Just the different things that the schools used to offer, you know, music, carpentry. These things I think help kids find their way quicker in life. Not everybody wants to go to college or can go to college, but I personally know someone who went to wood shop and has a company in Miami, and he's doing really well.
Yeah.
And he's been doing this ever since he graduated.
Like woodwork?
Yes, yeah. Building cabinets and
all of that stems from his high school experience?
It all came from high school experience, yes.
When you were in high school, well, actually first I wanted to ask you, like, just so people have context, when did you go to high school?
I was born in 1974.
Okay.
And I was in high school around in the 90s,
okay.
80s.
Okay, 80s to
like
90s?
88, yeah, around 80s, 88, 94.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, that was definitely a way different time than now.
Yeah.
So going back to that, when you were in high school, you mentioned your friend that has the business. Like, how passionate, how connected do you think his experience in having access to this class to his success today? Do you think there's a direct connection?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I kept in touch with him,
okay.
you know, for quite some time after he graduated, and you know, he was working for people at one time, and next thing you know, hey, Roy, I opened up my own shop, you know, and then he expanded from that shop to a bigger warehouse.
Yeah.
And having these $80,000, $100,000 machines that help him with his woodwork, like, wow, you know, going from 2 employees to 60 employees.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, you know,
cool.
And that's a direct, I can tell you, this person from this school went to this shop class and look what he has.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's very cause and effect. Like, you can point on paper and be like, look.
This, absolutely.
Okay, so some questions that I have about this. When do you feel like there was a shift? I know you said you had 2 kids, or you have 2 kids. I almost said
2
have.
daughters.
That would be tragic.
They're still here.
Different podcast. But I was going to say, where do you feel like you see a shift in the American public education system?
I can't tell where it happened.
Okay.
You know?
But you notice your daughters today.
Yes, because the schools just don't offer it anymore.
Gotcha.
It's not there.
Yeah, I was going to say, and this is me just, because I agree with you personally, but I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because I can see where this counter argument would come in, right? I was going to say, today, it seems like a lot of the focus is on media literacy and and like computer skills.
Yes.
And college preparedness, right?
Yes.
So those two things in the public education system, acknowledging obviously the income level of a certain area affects the resources, which is like a whole different stupid conversation. All that being said, someone would say, well, okay, maybe we don't have home ec, maybe we don't have wood shop, maybe we don't have all of these things, but that's because those jobs aren't needed anymore. What we really need is, people who can manage social media, people who know how to do coding. And I'm not saying schools offer that, but what would your response to, I guess, that question be, where it's kind of more of a shift in the demand, the job demand?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I would never say that it's more important, because there's going to come a time in this country where you're going to realize, hey, you know what? I need to start cooking my own food.
Yeah.
These people are poisoning me.
Yeah, this factor meal is not cutting it, or whatever the online shipping stuff is
When
now.
you have the opportunity to travel outside the Western Hemisphere and go somewhere where they're literally taking the food out of the forest and taking it out of the ground and eating it, you will realize that you are eating garbage in this country the majority of the time, because everybody's so fast-paced. They don't have time to do anything because of their jobs. They got to go here and go there and do this. And living in a computer screen all day, don't have time to cook. They just push a button and there's the food.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that every child should be focused on the high-tech industry, because many cannot make it in that area, and now they're being left behind because they're bringing I guess another group of people to do that type of work instead of that too. But I just think keeping the basics around for kids should always be a priority also.
I agree. And just to clarify, do you feel like the world would be in a better place today if these classes and resources in schools were never altered and all students had access to this still?
I can't say the whole world would be in a better place.
Well, United States.
I want to think so.
Okay.
I think the odds would be in our favor.
Okay.
To be in a much better place.
Yeah.
There's so many other things going on besides that,
I guess my backup to that is like, do you think kids today, because of the lack of resources, are worse off?
Yes, absolutely. I can see it. I can see it in my own neighborhood.
Yeah.
I can see it. When the kids don't have nothing to do, guess what? They're in your yard. Guess what? When those lights go out, they're prowling the neighborhood, walking around looking in car doors and looking for things that they can get easy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I know when I was growing up, I was focused on my mechanic shop the next day or whatever instrument I had in the house I wanted to practice on.
Because you might have been tested or something.
Yes. That's what I was doing. Now, they don't have none of that.
Yeah.
It's not there. So they're walking around with their friends at night, looking at stuff. Hey, I dare you throw a brick to that car window.
Yeah. No one wants to feel like, even though teenagers do want to feel like they fit in.
Yes.
At the end of the day, everyone wants to have agency over their lives.
Yes.
Yeah. And like you said, like doing stuff like that gives you agency, but in a different way.
Yeah. I think profit has become more important than the future of most kids. They're not too worried about it. They just want the money.
Yeah, and not in short and fast money.
So where can we cut to save money? And why should we put money there? We're not getting it back.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you about it, and you had the hands down one of the most unique and best answers. So I'm glad that you did come back. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of the Normal Person Podcast. We've journeyed through time and nostalgia, exploring normal people's heartfelt connections to things that no longer exist. Whether it's the communal experience of Blockbuster, the simplicity of iPods, or even the sincerity of talking to others through a landline. Each conversation you've heard today highlights just how much these bygone eras fostered a sense of togetherness and community that seems to just not exist in the current world. I want to extend a big thank you to all of the guests who sat down with me and shared their unique perspectives and stories on today's episode. And of course, a huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this nostalgic trip. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing or following us to stay updated on new episodes every week. Also, we'd love to hear what defunct item or thing you wish still existed and why. So email us or reach out to us on social media at normalpersonpod. We'll be sharing our favorite nostalgic responses on Instagram stories throughout this week, so be sure to follow us if you haven't already. Until next time, I'm your host Kelly Boshton, reminding you that sometimes looking back can also help us move forward. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.